Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies and TV Shows on the Ball. My name is Steve, and welcome to, we're finally getting to it, part 2 of our Daredevil Man Without Fear podcast. Yes, we are going to be discussing on this episode, the first episode of Daredevil, the television Netflix series that was on Netflix from 2015 to I think 2018. It lasted for about 3 seasons. And then they took it off Netflix and moved it to Disney Plus, and so it is on Disney Plus. And I decided, since about a couple months ago, we were going to do, since I did a Daredevil podcast, I want to kind of follow up and do it on the first episode of Daredevil, the television series, or so sit back and enjoy the Man Without Fear in Netflix's Daredevil. So Daredevil came out, was on. So here's how. According to Wikipedia, here's how Daredevil came to be. So Marvel's Daredevil is an American television series created by Drew Goddard for the streaming service Netflix, based on the Marvel comic character. Daredevil is set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and acknowledging the continuity of the franchise films, and was the first Marvel Netflix series leading to the crossover miniseries The Defenders. Daredevil was produced by Marvel Television associated with ABC Studios. Stephen S. DeKnight served as showrunner for the first season, with Doug Peretti and Marco Riemaz taking over as co-showrunners for the second season, and Eric Olson judging content of the series. So here's how it came to be, and here's how the development. Because what happened was, the Daredevil, the movie, didn't do so hot. So basically, so this was right before Michael Clark Duncan died in 2013. So this had nothing to do with the cancellation of the Daredevil 2 sequel. Daredevil 2, according to fandom, says Daredevil 2 was the planned sequel to the 2003 film Daredevil, with Ben Affleck returning as his character, and Mr. Fear was going to be the villain in the film. In July 2006, Michael Clark Duncan suggested that the character is portrayed to have been training a lot in jail in order to become faster in combat against Daredevil, as working as a way to fit in his weight loss into development. So here's the development of the story. That's what Michael Clark Duncan wanted to happen had he returned for Daredevil 2. In July of 2004, Ben Affleck shot a cameo role for the spin-off film Elektra at the request of Daredevil co-star Jennifer Gardner. In October 2004, Affleck stated that he would only return in the lead role if Fox would renegotiate to tell the darker stories of Daredevil, and showed interest in a Kevin Smith graphic novel which included Mysterio as well as the Born Again storyline. In July of 2006, Michael Clark Duncan showed interest in returning to the role of the Kingpin, but stated that he would not be willing to gain weight, as he felt comfortable being down to only 270 pounds. He jokingly showed willingness to change his mind if he was offered $20 million. Duncan suggested that the character is portrayed to have been training a lot in jail in order to become faster in combat against Daredevil, also working as a way to fit in his weight loss into the story. In November 2006, Affleck stated that he would never reprise his role, having felt by playing a superhero in Daredevil, I have no interest, including myself, forever being in another superhero film wearing a costume was a source of humiliation for me, and something I wouldn't want to do again soon. But 10 years later, in 2016, he showed up for Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice as the Caped Crusader. So I think it probably wasn't that he wanted to be a superhero. I don't think he wanted to be a Marvel superhero. Um, and the reason why it was canceled, there was the poor box office performance and negotiation, negative reception of Elektra's film outranked the box office gross and negative reception of the theatrical cut of Daredevil. Although Ben Affleck is a fan of the character, he stated that playing the character while while acting him out was such an unpleasant experience, and stated in November 2006 interview, stated that I had no interest in reprising his role as the title character, and the suit was uncomfortable. Uh, so Daredevil is now a standalone film. And then what happened was the character was actually left out for about 8 years, this seems a lot longer. But then Netflix acquired the rights to the character and proceeded to make the Netflix Daredevil series, which ran for 3 seasons before cancellation, and then his character returned again in the series in the Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man No Way Home. So I'm gonna kind of go through the so like kind of here's sort of the plot of, or the sort of the cast of Daredevil. So and then I'll go into the episode. So the cast of Daredevil included so Daredevil the series was created by Drew Goddard. Drew Goddard is best known for movies such as Cabin in the Woods. He's done Cloverfield, The Martian, the Cloverfield Paradox, Cloverfield 2. Excuse me. He produced World War Z, and he has done. I think he also produced the Deadpool films and episodes of Lost. He actually wrote some episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 8 and Angel. So there's a connection to what we talked about. So he created Daredevil. It was produced by it was let's see. And it's based on Daredevil by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, like we said in the Daredevil thing. It starred Charlie Cox. Charlie Cox is best known for portraying Matt Murdock in the Daredevil series, but he also had a career in his filmography. He was in Casanova with Heath Ledger. He was in the 2007 film Stardust. He was in The Theory of Everything, King of Thieves, and he returned as Matt Murdock in a cameo for Spider-Man No Way Home. He plays Daredevil, and what's interesting about I like how he plays more of a very like there's more of a character depth to him in this series. I think part of it is because it's written so well, and I think the second part is because you have 3 seasons to really explore the character. And I like what he's done, and we'll get more into it as the show goes on. But I just wanted to give him kind of a credit that this is probably one of his big roles as well. He will be returning back to the Netflix Disney Plus series Daredevil Born Again, which should be coming out. They haven't had a release date, but it should be in early 2024. So we got a year. So that's Matt Murdock. Then you had Deborah Ann Wool. Deborah Ann Wool is plus known in this series. She plays Karen Page in the Marvel in this show. Karen Page, she kind of did. She was kind of this. If you knew where she was, or where she was, like in the movie. In the movie, she played more of a secretary to Ben Affleck and Jon Favreau's Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson, and kind of didn't really have a character arc. In this show, she has more of a character to deal with. Roles include she showed up in the Marvel the Daredevil Netflix universe in the Defenders and the Punisher as Karen Page. Her film roles include Mother's Day in 2010, 7 Days in Utopia in 2011, Someday This Pain Will Be Useful to You in 2011, Catch 44 or Catch Point 44, Ruby Sparks 2012, Meet Me in Montgomery Road, The Automatic Hate, and and the commercially successful Escape Room and its 2021 sequel. And she's recently done some good work in the 2020 last year in the God of War Ragnarok video game. She's done a lot of TV work. Her recent after the whole television series or the Disney TV series or the TV series, she had an episode. She was in one episode of Quantum Leap, just the name of for the new series Quantum Leap. But she plays Karen Page, and Karen Page, she's more of an interesting character, where like what we kind of get in the DVD, the movie version, she's just sort of there to just kind of like I think she has one conversation with Foggy Nelson, but in this show she really has, like, we'll get into it the first episode, but there's more of a dynamic to her in this show. Speaking of Foggy Nelson is who was played by Jon Favreau in Daredevil the movie. He is played by Eldon Henson. Eldon Henson is basically best known for his role in he played Foggy in the 38 episodes of this show, Foggy Nelson. I knew he was in episodes or in the film The Butterfly Effect and the Denzel Washington film Deja Vu, but I know him from I think I saw him the first time was in the 1999 film She's All That. He played a character named Jesse Jackson, who was Boggy Langs, who was Lonnie Boggs, excuse me, Rachel Lee Cook's best friend, and She's All That. But he also had a role. I didn't know this until I kind of started watching the Mighty Ducks films. But he played one of the Bash brothers in Mighty Ducks. He played the Fulton Reed in the Mighty Ducks films. He was both in Mighty Ducks 1, Mighty Ducks 2, Mighty Ducks 3. And he showed up in a cameo for the Mighty Ducks Game Changer, which is a sequel series that lasted 2 seasons, but was very good with Emilio Estevez back as Coach Bombay. So it's kind of interesting because I saw like the first season of the Mighty Ducks show, and I was pretty strong with it, but just I was like, oh wait, that's the guy from Daredevil. So that's, and he plays a pretty good Foggy Nelson. There's more. I think that's the thing. I think with a television show, you have enough time to really develop your characters. I think especially with kind of having two renditions of the character as two renditions of the characters. It's kind of interesting to look at it, but I think you've got more time and to give like some of these smaller characters more depth. So that's Foggy Nelson. Then you had uh, the next person you had was, according to IMDb, I'm just gonna go through the list of you've got Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays Wilson Fisk. Vincent D'Onofrio is best known. I knew him from films such as Men in Black, where he played Edgar the Bug, and most 90 kids probably know him as Edgar the Bug. You want to put my hands on my head, and then he turns into the alien. He was in The Cell. He was recently in Jurassic World, where he played the guy who wanted to put lasers on the raptors for the military purposes in Jurassic World. But I know him. He's really done very well as Kingpin in this series. And he's very much. I've watched a couple, like probably the first 3 episodes, and he plays him in sort of a very calm demeanor, which is very interesting. And I think there's a difference when we look at something like, you look at comic book film, such as you look at the 2003 Daredevil film, and how that is so comic booky, and then you look at and kind of the way and kind of how serious you look at the Netflix series takes Daredevil, and even Wilson Fisk in more of a sympathetic character, which I want to get into later on. And then to round out the main cast is that's pretty much to round out the main cast so far. I'll kind of like, I think probably the other one is episode 1. Let's see. Is James Wesley, who is basically was played by the guy from he was in Taken 1, but James Wesley is played by Toby Leonard Moore, who is kind of Wilson Fisk's right-hand man. You know him from he played Victor in John Wick. He was in the television series Billions from 2016 to 2020. He was in episodes of White Collar. He was in an episode of Blue Bloods. He was in episodes of Dollhouse. He was in. I mean, he's kind of had a pretty. But this is one of his main roles. He was in Bull, the television series Bull, and the TV miniseries The Usual Suspects, and in American Insurrection, which was a movie back in 2021. But um, he plays Wesley, and he's more of an interesting character in this show, where he's more like, kind of, he's kind of Kingpin's right hand man, but he's very much like, in this first episode, he's very much like, he always refers to his boss as or as Kingpin, excuse me, as my employer. So that kind of rounds up the cast. I'm gonna watch the first episode and give you my thoughts. Oh, and the other oh, before we go, the other main cast is Bob Gunton. Bob Gunton is best known for his role in Shawshank Redemption. He played the evil warden, Nelson Norton. Uh, he was in episodes of 24. Uh, he was in episodes of Law and Order SVU. And he was in the movie The Lincoln Lawyer. And episodes of Numbers and Desperate Housewives, to name a few. I mean, he's had a long career as well, but his other films, he was the evil dean in Patch Adams, and he was the excuse me, he was in The Perfect Storm, to name a few. And he was in Ace Ventura 2 as well. So anyway, and he's a big, they've got a really good, strong cast, and I think especially from the evil warden of Shawshank Redemption, I think that, they had a very good cast. So so that's the cast and all, and we're going to talk about the first episode. Here we go. So the way the episode opens up, and whereas I'm kind of going to go with the differences between this and the film, is in the film it really sort of gives you sort of Matt Murdock's sort of origin, and especially with the director's cut, it pretty much states kind of him before the accident, and then him during the accident, and then growing up to be the Daredevil. Here we're pretty much shot right into the opening scene where the accident has happened, and it looks like it happens right in like the middle of the street versus him going to the docks to see his dad, and the forklift hits the barrels of chemical and it sprays into his eye. We're pretty much straight into the scene where he is got the chemicals on his eye and his burns, and his father is coming to the rescue. His father is going to be played by John Patrick Hayden, who is best known for his roles in Pretty Little Liars Original Sin TV series. He was in TV series FBI. He showed up for 3 episodes in this show. He was in an episode of Law and Order SVU. And he was in episodes of Younger and episodes of Blue Bloods, just to name a few. So he plays the dad, and you kind of see him only in this opening scene. He actually shows up in season 3 when we get to it, but he's basically comes to his son's rescue. His son's lying on the ground. The chemicals has just burnt his eyes. He actually helped. The way, I guess, it's sort of the aftermath of what happens, of him sort of pushing out of the way an older man, and the chemicals have kind of gotten to his eye, and he's basically about to son a seed for the last time. apparently, and Jack grabs his son and holds him while his son's saying, "It burns, it burns, it burns," and then we cut to 20 years later. Now we're in the confessional where Daredevil or Matt Murdock is pretty much kind of giving us sort of for those who have not seen the first episode, or not the first episode, but the movie, sort of the um, Daredevil's father's origin, as how his dad was a boxer, and that he kind of had the nickname Matt or Devil Jack the Devil Murdoch, and how his grandmother said, watch out for the Murdoch boys. They'll put the devil in you. And he sort of is asking for penance for what he's about to do and not what he's done, which is kind of interesting. And it kind of goes into sort of more of he had basically, kind of his record and sort of his basically the Matt Murdock is giving us the audience's Jack's sort of backstory in a pretty past way of talking. And so basically he says he lost more than he won. He had a 24-31 record before he and basically how he could take a punch, and how people that went up against him said he felt like fighting an oak tree. And he does say in the confessional, he says, Jesus, he takes the punch. And the reverend or the priest kind of, calls him out on it, which I thought was pretty nice. He pretty much asked for, what, the priest kind of asked him what he's about to do. And he says, it's not what I'm gonna do, what I've done, it's what I'm about to do. We also kind of get sort of the backstory on how, Daredevil's grandmother was a very devout Catholic, and how she was basically a very strong Catholic woman who didn't want her sons to kind of get into any of this.
She used to say that.
And she did. And one of the quotes that Daredevil says is, be careful of the Murdoch boys. They've got the devil in them. And he's basically, he's basically, and you basically says he's in the ring. And then he kind of much says Charlie, or basically kind of gives him sort of how his father would fight in the ring, and how his father's, how Matt kind of describes it as his eyes would go dead and he'd start walking forward real slow, and in his society, wasn't like he wasn't afraid of anything. And the other guy he sees that look, and he'd see the look and try to get away from him. So we could kind of tell through his discussion of Matt, or of Jack, that he was very much a strong, intimidated boxer back in his day. And then ask him, do you understand it now? And he says, perhaps this would be easier if you just tell me what you've done. And what I like what Matt says is, it's not what I've done, it's what I'm about to do. And the priest is like, well, that's not how this works. And he says,
I'm not seeking.
and he's not, and then he says,
I'm asking forgiveness.
he's only asking for forgiveness for what he's about to do. And the priest is like, this is not how it works. And
What exactly?
he's asking what he's exactly going to do. Cut to Daredevil goes out back to business. And what I like about what they did in this show is, because I think it's kind of got an edgier, darker feel to it versus the comic book feel that the 2003 film did. What Daredevil in this one, he pretty much has a headband on, and he kind of wears sort of red, kind of dark, kind of blood red, dark clothes. And so they're on. So the scene starts out where they're on the docks, and a guy named Turk, who is played by the actor. Hold on. Turk is played by. Portrayed by. He's played by Rob Morgan. Rob Morgan is best known, according to his filmography. He was a cab driver in 30 Rock. He was in episodes of Blue Bloods. He was in a lot of television series instead of in Persons of Interest. He shows back up in a lot of the Daredevil spin-off shows, such as Luke Cage, The Defenders, and The Punisher, and Jessica Jones and Iron Fist. His films roles include he was in Mudbloods, Westlands, Monsters and Men. He was in a film called Bull, Greyhound, and he's recently been in the new 2022 film Smile that came out last year. So that's him, and so he basically is. There's no way to say this, but best way to say this, but he's basically trafficking girls in kind of off the docks, and he's basically trying to get them into a compartment when Daredevil shows up, and then we get to see Daredevil fighting people. What I like about it is that he fights them, and it's very. It's a lot brutal. It's a lot more brutal than I think what we see in the Avengers or Spider-Man, and I think like with and I think that is kind of mixed with the darker tone. Like you can see him actually twist somebody's arm and like almost break it, and he does a couple flips. Turk kind of gets back his consciousness and grabs a gun and starts to shoot at Daredevil, and Daredevil escapes through the shipment crates, and he gets on the shipment crates, and Turk looks for him. After he basically shoots his gun, and Daredevil hears it and does a couple like rolls and stuff to get away from Turk. And it kind of has, what's interesting is I like how it's at the docks and it's a lot darker, wetter in a way, like the ground's a lot wet, more, wet. And and it kind of reminded me a little bit, now looking at this, doing this podcast, that it reminded me a lot like the scene in Batman Begins. So that's kind of what I like. And so he escapes through the crate in through the middle of the crates, and Turk goes looking for him. So they kind of play a game of hide and seek, where Turk is looking for him on top of the crates. He goes to the bottom of the crate, kind of on the bottom of the crate, sneaks up behind him and throws a metal baton at Turk, and then throws another baton or the same baton that's I guess or a metal rod at one of the guys watching the girls, and he goes over to the girls and tells them to stay off, you know, to basically leave, stay, get in the light and go to, I think it was 42nd Street. Excuse me, it's 48th Street, and to flag down the first officer they see, and then he tells them to just go and run. Turk ends up kind of getting his consciousness back and runs, or no, not runs, but crawls to find a gun and basically cocks it, and then Daredevil, through his super sense, super hearing, hears it and ends up knocking Turk out. What's interesting is that when he knocks him out, it's not like he punches him out and he's basically down for the count. What I like, it's kind of what makes it more darker, more mature, if you will, is he is on top of Turk, and he starts beating the hell out of Turk, and then we get to opening credits. So the next scene is basically Matt is basically lying in bed, and he gets a phone call from Foggy, and I think what's interesting, just kind of a side note, is that they play, I think he really plays the blind character very faithfully, but without meaning too condescending, because he's sort of sitting on the bed or laying on bed, and his phone rings and it says Foggy, 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 and he picks it up, and then we kind of introduce to Foggy, played by the guy from The Hunger Games, and he says, he basically tells them that that he needs to get up and meet they're actually looking meet the real estate agent, because they're looking for a new office for their law firm, Nelson and Murdoch. And he says, and then he's basically is on his way, and he talks about, he talks to Matt, and Matt's moans, and he thinks that it's a beautiful woman, and he says that, I think you realize throughout the series that Foggy looks at, kind of the handicap as a way to get ladies, which you'll see when they get to the office look. So Foggy ends up going to see his friend Brett, who is a beat cop, and Brett is beat cop, and he offers, he hands him a bag of cigars to him for his mom, and Brett is played by Royce Johnson. Royce Johnson is best known for his appearances, and he showed up in the DC. I mean, he seems to be like a player in the DC Defenders series, such as Jessica Jones, Punisher, and Daredevil. But you may know him from such films other than his Marvel films, such as He was in the additional crew in Let's Be Cops. He was in Ghost in the Graveyard, Demolition. He was in the he was in episodes of Madam Secretary, the Cancel Too Soon television series Forever. He was in episodes of The Blacklist, the Cancel Too Soon series Do No Harm. He was in episodes of Law and Order SVU and episodes of Law and Order. So he's played a lot of. He was in an episode of Third Watch, Law and Order, Criminal Intent. So he's been in a lot of. He's played a lot of cops in a lot of films. So he goes over to, or Foggy goes over to him and asks him for a tip if there's anything that, to kind of get cases. And he kind of I won't say bribes him, but he bribes. Yeah, kind of bribes the officer with cigars for his mother. And we also understand that he and Foggy have known each other since they were young. So there's that, and they start talking, and he kind of says that these, he kind of says, please, he kind of tells him not to give his mom cigars, and Foggy's pretty much asking for anything immoral. He's asking you to do anything immoral, and he seems to be like a good cop. That he kind of says, you're right, it ain't the careers. Because Foggy needs to help out if something is interesting shows up. And then he walks off. And then we get to the excuse me. Then we get to the where they're looking at offices to kind of start their law firm at, and they meet with the real estate agent, played by Amy Lauren Ruth Rottenberg. Gosh, that's a mouth to say. She was in episode. Her filmography includes. She was in episodes of Pacific Blue. She was in the television series Everwood. Excuse me. She played a nurse in As the World Turns. She was in the episodes of Law and Order. She was in episodes of Law and Order Criminal Intent. She was in the good episodes of The Good Wife. She showed back up in season 3 and season 2 in Daredevil. She was in episodes of Bull. She was in the episode of Marvel's The Defenders. So they do kind of recycle their own cast. And she was in the 2-season show Taken, based on the Leslie Nielsen trilogy. Her other she's been in another episode of Law and Order SVU and FBI, to name a few. The television series. So she's showing them their new office building, and she says that excuse me. She says that the office building is very cheap because of the events of the 2012. No, is it? Talks about after how property has gone so cheap after the incident,
And according to the incident, in the Avengers 1 final is the Avengers 1 final battle where the Cretaceous, those aliens, descended upon New York City, destroying lots of buildings throughout the middle of Manhattan. The Daredevil episodes are taking place about 2 years afterwards in real time and just before Avengers 2 takes place. So that's where Daredevil and Avengers sort of merge. New York City is being rebuilt with government funds, and there is a plot involving devastating these funds. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But so when she says the incident, it means she's talking about Daredevil, or she's talking about the Avengers 2012 film. So she basically she's kind of going through it, doing her sort of selling her, pitching the uh, pitching the office to them, and she does mention like you two can flip for the window, and Daredevil says, or no, Matt says that Foggy can have it, and she just realizes she kind of feels bad and realizes that he's blind, and then um, and then she's after realizing that she's blind, Daredevil takes, or not Daredevil, Matt, Matt and Sharon, I'm going to call Sharon, basically kind of walks him around the room to kind of get a feel for the office space. He basically sells him that, Hell's Kitchen is on the rebound and you won't be able to find prices as cheap as this in a couple months. And Daredevil, or not Daredevil, God, Matt basically says, we'll take it. And Foggy's a little bit concerned that, we probably can't afford this, as he calls it, a palace, because unless we get more clientele. And then Matt says to Matt pretty much basically sort of weaves the real estate agent into kind of talking about their client, or like kind of their clientele, and how Matt wants to say that he believes that his clients are innocent, and Foggy says, I believe that innocents include everyone not yet convicted of a crime yet. And then basically he says, we need more clientele, and and Foggy's like, do you think he just thinks that a client will, he says he doesn't believe that a client will just fall into his arms, and Matt says, at this point, I'm just hoping for one. So you kind of notice that they're desperate to find kind of clients to really build their law firm up. Then when he says just one, then we see a bloody hand with a knife. And we're introduced to the Karen Page character, or Karen Page, and she's basically, the cops show up and she's screaming, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And you can see that even though she's carrying a bloody knife, you can tell that she could be guilty, and they end up arresting her for the alleged murder of her boyfriend. She screams and says, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, as they try to cuff her. And then after it's try to cuff her, Foggy gets a phone call from Brett about sort of the homicide that just happened.
Hey, buddy.
Female suspect.
And he's basically gives her basically that they arrested her and definitely and how it's basically definitely counts as interesting.
Definitely qualifies.
And then well, and then they ask her if she's been charged, and the assistant DA hasn't made the call yet. So they go over to, and because Matt's got super hearing, he kind of overhears the conversation, and
Do you have a name on the suspect?
and
Yeah.
we find out that it's Karen Page, which, so that's how she's kind of introduced to the story. So they show up as her lawyers, as I said, and they pretty much sit down and ask her what happened, and she basically gives them the spiel of what happened. And she says that
You were found in your apartment?
basically they're asking her questions about, how she was found in the apartment of one Daniel Fisher, and how she's kind of they kind of assume that it is a homicide. And then Karen's pretty much kind of amazed that she's already got lawyers, and Foggy says, I bribed a desk sergeant with cigars, and Matt's like, you need to stop giving Beth cigars. And Karen's still freaked out and sort of like trying to figure out how she got lawyers, and basically basically she says that a little bit curious about how long they've been practicing law, and she says that we've been practicing law for about like 8 hours, and he says I was going from when we got our own desk.
7 hours.
So they said it was 7 hours, and she's a little appalled that her lawyers are so much rookies. And then she says that she doesn't have enough money to pay them, and Foggy kind of says, well, kind of wants to almost ditch her for the fact that she didn't pay, but Matt says, why don't we work together? You don't have any money, and we don't have any clients, and why don't we just work together? And then they end up taking a deposition, and how she was working for Union Allen Construction, and how she's a secretary. Daniel worked downstairs in legal. So then Karen says that she actually tried to ask out one of her co-workers, Daniel, and she feels like because it was so hard to meet people in the city, and so she asked him for a drink, and they met at the bar.
Oh shit, it's still recorded.
They had a few drinks, and the next time that I remember, she thinks that she's been framed for murder because she woke up with her hands in his blood, holding the knife, and
I don't know
And so as she's sort of pleading with Matt about the incident and screaming that she says, "Please, you have to believe me, I didn't kill him." You can hear Matt kind of slowly listen to his heartbeat, her heartbeat, and she says that, "I believe you, Miss Page." Cut to the park where we see a man eating a sandwich. And the man eating a sandwich, the other man played by um, played by Wesley shows up, who was in his suit and tie. Wesley is played by James Wesley is played by Toby Leonard Moore. Toby Leonard Moore is best known for, and he's more of a character. He was in John Wick, as I've said, and he was in Billions, and I think I've already covered him. But he walks up to this guy who's eating a sandwich in the park, and he basically throws out a number, and the number is 28,957, and then the guy says, who is played by not Wesley, but see who's played by, but he says, tell Rigoletto that you'll get his money, and he starts to walk off, and then Wesley says, "I want to show you something," and he pops open his tablet, and it shows an image of a girl sitting in the field, sitting in a park, talking to a friend, and Wesley says, please, points out to, kind of it talks about how, I'm kind of basically he tells him that he's been spying on his daughter as a guy who's been kind of watching her in secret, and then Wesley tells the man to call her, and so he does call her. The daughter picks up and says, "Hey, Dad," and he says, "Hey, sweetie, how are you?" And the daughter is played by he's played by, his name's Clyde Farnan. He's played by J. Tucker Smith, who was in City on Hill. He was in episodes of Bull. He played a teacher in the movie Mr. 8th Grade. He was played the voice of the local politician in Grand Theft Auto 5, and he was in episodes of Damages and One Life to Live. And then he's calling his daughter. His daughter is played by hold on one second. His daughter is played by and he was also in 13 Days. His daughter was played by let me find it. Sorry guys about this. Played by Elise Kiblar. Elise Kiblar, who plays Susan. She's best known for Sunlit Night in 2019. She was in The After, and she was in the television series Younger, to name a few. So she's sitting in the field with her friend, and Wesley kind of threatens him to call her, and so he calls her, and
What is it about?
and he says, "Hey, sweetie, how are you?" is everything going good? And um, he's like, yeah, Dad, everything's going good. I probably need to swing by the house to do some laundry. And and then Wesley tells him that if you don't pay up, he shows an image of a man sitting at a bench, and the man is reading a newspaper, and he says, "Give us a wave, Mister." Him if he wants to catch a movie after after his shift. And I like how you see Wesley sort of sitting there letting her talk to his daughter, and he's very much like sophisticatedly threatening, in his demeanor, or he's very sophisticated. He wears a suit. This is Wesley speaking up. He has glasses. He has his hair pulled back, and he does seem to be much of a team player than he did in the Daredevil movie in 2003. Tells, I think I already said this, that he basically says that he has got somebody watching his daughter, kind of at the park, and I like how he says, "Give us a wave."
Mr. Foreman, I find his methods.
Give us a wave, Mr. Foreman. And Mr. Foreman sits on the bench and kind of waves his hand at the.
Give us a wave, Mr. Rance.
Mr. Rance, excuse me, not Mr. Foreman, Mr. Rance, and he gives him a wave that he's been kind of watching Mr. Foreman's daughter.
I will get you the money.
And Mr. Foreman says, he kind of says, "I told you I'll get you the money."
Interest in my employer, your position.
And then he pretty much says, money is not really the answer, but your position is more important. And then he sort of gives in and says, "What do you want me to do?" Then we get to basically Foggy and Matt. They're in there. They're finally sort of packed, and they're talking about their they're talking about their kind of the case, and that they want to take that Matt and Foggy kind of have parallel issues. Foggy wants Matt to take the deal, and Foggy says, that's why they have deals, Matt.
DA's office.
And then basically Matt doesn't want to take the deal. Foggy says they have the evidence to make the deal, and
this is a good arrest.
He says that it's a good arrest, and and how basically they have Matt feels basically Foggy thinks the case is good and it stands great. Matt says he has a funny feeling about this case, and Matt says I can feel it, and basically Foggy calls out Matt for sort of says if he says you can feel it, but if a case involves a beautiful woman, then that
this one, and we can move on.
That
you don't necessarily show
you show poor judgment because of beautiful women, and he says, he says, how would I know if she's a beautiful woman? He says, I don't know, it's kind of spooky, but it's the stunning woman with questionable characters in the room. Matt Murdock's going to find her, and Foggy Nelson's going to suffer. And so there is this kind of feeling that Foggy Nelson feels a little bit like, I think Matt's got more of a charisma. It does kind of seem like Matt has more of a charisma than Foggy, and which is a little bit different than the way that Foggy in the Jon Favreau in the Daredevil film as Jon Favreau is more of the comedic sense, and Foggy in this one has more of a serious sense to it. So then, fine, let's give them an alternative then. If she didn't do it, then who did? And if she did it, if she didn't do it, they're dead in the water if they don't find a replacement. So then we basically see
We need to take another run at our client.
they need to take another run at their client.
He may not be guilty, Matt. But that doesn't mean Miss Page is telling the truth.
And they're worried that that Karen is not telling the truth. So that same night, Karen is sleeping in her bed in her cell, and a man comes in dressed up as a guard and ends up taking a cloth and trying to suffocate her, or basically suffocate her into and killing her, and basically strangle her so she doesn't talk to the feds, or talk to, not the feds, but talk to, basically to kind of cover up what the business is doing. So then find out that the guy that basically, the guard that strangles Karen or tries to kill her, we find out that he is the guy that Wesley ended up speaking to a couple that scene ago. So we know that he is a guard for the New York police office. And then they hear about the strangulation or the incident of the strangulation, and end up they talk to the DA to get Karen out of prison. And then basically Foggy and Matt pretty much say that, release, after the events of trying to kill her in prison, if you release Miss Page into their custody, that they can be able to, won't pass civil lawsuits against the prison. And the ADA administrator says, "How do you know that she wasn't, that it wasn't, trying to be self-inflicted or anything?" And he says, because of Matt, a good lawyer, he says, beside the fact that you were required to do so 4 hours ago, if you were going to do it at all.
That's an excellent
And Foggy says that was an excellent question, and kind of questions why the security camera on Mrs. Page's detention area
How the security cameras on Miss Page's detention area
went on the fritz right before the assault. And you can kind of see that both the police officers are looking at the two men, and he's like, he does one of the assault, and they want to
Get in line. It'll be arraigned in the morning.
talk to Mr. Foreman again, who is basically blackmailed from Wesley, and he says, "Get in line, Mr. Foreman will be arraigned in the morning." And then and then you can tell that the other DA officer is pretty much pissed off that that he actually even goes to the point of threatening Matt by saying, even if you are blind, I'd still kick your ass. And he's like saying, and Matt doesn't say anything, but Foggy says, threatening a blind man is really smart to do. And then, but Matt's kind of concerned that it doesn't make any sense. The ADA had everything that they wanted, unless they had too much. And he kind of feels like Foggy and Matt feel like there's something more precedent about trying to kill Karen. And
Maybe someone else is in her apartment.
And then he kind of is kind of pondering the idea that maybe somebody else was in her apartment that night. maybe they had evidence that Brady's material, that why was she only charged? She hanged her, but he also is trying to put pieces together that what if she hanged herself in her cell and this all goes away.
Let's get her some clothes again.
And so they end up busting her out of jail, or getting her released from jail, and basically they go back to Foggy and Murdoch's office. Then getting them out, but just even though they got her out, Matt warns her not to say anything to anybody else about the case except for them, and to them about what happened. But she's a little bit defensive and says, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And then she says that I've got a place to stay, which is my apartment, and Matt pretty much gives up or says you can stay. He says your apartment's probably the most threatening and dangerous place to be, that the best place for you to stay is at my place. And then she also said, and he also says the only reason why I'm thinking that maybe going to my apartment would be better is for your immediate, because their immediate priority is Karen's safety. So then Karen is basically asked the question by Matt, who is trying to kill her, and she ends up telling them that she doesn't know who's trying to kill her. And she kind of says she does, and then she ends up doing basically she tells on a deposition with a recorder that how she worked for the financial department of Union Allied, and that her company oversees the bulk of the government of the West Side Recreation, and how they were going to rebuild Hell's Kitchen, which is connected to the Avengers movie with the destruction of New York. Again, this is still kind of tied into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so there's sort of this scene pretty much discusses the way the contracts for New York is happening. And she also tells them that Union Alley benefited from every penny of it. And she tells them that her job was that she was the secretary of the chief account. And one of her jobs was to coordinate claims for the company, pension claims for the company. And then she stumbles a week ago. She says she stumbles upon the pension master, which basically said that I've been meant for my boss, but she ended up making she saw the pension master. She thought it was meant for her boss, but she made the mistake of actually opening it, and she finds out that it wasn't a pension fund. They were actually using it it was for the pension fund, that basically it was being actually adjusted with money coming in and money going out. And she doesn't really know where it went out, but what she do, and she told her boss, Mr. McClintock, about it, and he ended up laughing it off. He didn't think it was a big deal. He said that it was theoretically a model that was screwing around with. And then it was just her boss just trying to embezzle the money. But Matt asked her, what about Daniel Fisher? And Daniel worked in the legal department. And how she didn't know him very well, and then she talks about and Daniel's the guy that she ended up allegedly murdering at the beginning of her scene, and that we kind of are introduced to her, but she kind of describes him as being so nice, and she asked him to meet him after work, and then she's sort of paranoid that she thinks that people are watching her. After they go out for a drink, she actually talked to him about what she found, and she's convinced that she got drugged at the bar. So then she basically talks about how she woke up back. The next thing she knew, she woke up back in her apartment with the knife covered in her blood. So that sort of covered in his blood, excuse me. And then she feels so terrible that she thinks she killed him because of me, or that she was killed because of me, and how she feels bad that because he had a family, and and a little boy. And she ends up, having an emotional breakdown and trying to leave, and Foggy stops her. She wants to go home, that she just bursts into tears and cries on Foggy's shoulder, and Matt pretty much says that he can, Matt can, or Paige, or Mrs. Paige, Karen can stay with Matt for the night. So Karen and Matt go to his apartment, and he gives her some clothes to change into. It starts to rain, and she looks outside of the apartment building to see a very bright billboard, and mannered about it. And he kind of says that how the co-op nearly rioted, and how they were so were so pissed that they basically said we should take it down, but he ended up getting a really good view for a cheap price, even though you can't see it. But
upside is nobody wanted it, and I got a court appointment.
After it, he hands Karen some clothes, and Karen changes into her clothes, and then it's kind of interesting. She actually changes her clothes, and she's completely bare naked, and it's a top collar thing. And I mean, it's but he's blonde, so he doesn't really can tell. Then she kind of asks him a personal question, and asks him, have you always, he kind of stops her and says, is it that I haven't always been blind? No. And he ends up sort of going through sort of what he talks about, kind of how he got through the trauma and learning how to be blind. And he says that when you deal with trauma, they tell you it's gonna be. He kind of describes it. He basically tells her how it happened. They end up talking about kind of how he went through trauma recovery, and
when I was 9.
How it happened when he was 9, and how he made it through. And then she asked him what she's kind of questioning, kind of what it was. Does she kind of more curious about him, about what it was like to see for him. She basically is trying to change the subject, um, change the subject, and he says, how he goes through the trauma and how he kind of does remember how he can see, and she can't imagine how it could be like, and he's like, you know, so he goes through why he doesn't, why he missed it, and how he goes through trauma,
So they teach you
trauma recovery, and define yourself by what you have, value the difference, make no apologies for what you lack. It's kind of, so he talks about that, and then he changes the subject, saying that you wouldn't believe what he would give to see the sky again. And then he talks to Karen about, the what's going on with the pension fraud, and then kind of asking Karen sort of his like why, kind of putting himself in the pension fund manager's shoes and wondering why after finding out about his secretary, going through the motions of why you think his secretary kind of knows about the pension plan and wants to know why he shouldn't killed her. And she's like, well, they tried, and they tried, and the second time in jail, but the first time they left you alive, and he's kind of questioning why. And she says that they're trying to frame Karen, and then he's kind of questioning pretty much the second time, and he's wondering, well, what if something doesn't go their way, something sloppy at the crime scene, two lawyers show up out of the blue before the people can get to it, so they figure out, maybe what they'll do is they'll make it look like a attempted suicide, where they'll try to get Karen to hang herself in her cell, and then try to get this thing swept up under the rug. But the first time, he's kind of Matt's kind of asking. The first time, they weren't trying to kill her; they were trying to just discredit her, not kill her. And Matt and discredit her and basically try to scare her into scare her, because the only reason why he believes the only reason why they're trying to scare her is that she has something they want. Her heartbeat, Karen's heartbeat, and he says the only thing that he could think of is the Union Allied pension file that was on her desk, or her computer, or her boss's computer. And then, blankly, did she keep the file? And what's interesting about this scene is it slowly Matt slowly hears the heart race of Karen, and she lies and says no. And then she asked him. She says no. I asked my boss about it, and they took it away from me. And then says that, I wish I made a copy for myself, but the IT guys came in and wiped the computers, and you can hear the heartbeat go faster, faster, faster. And then, so she is kind of lying to him. Allen pension fund, or Union Allen construction site, where they're up kind of on a building, and we've got pretty much the five crime bosses that are standing there. You had Bob Gunkert's character, Mr. and he's he and Madame Wong and two Russians are sitting there, and he's like going, "Why are we meeting at a construction site?" And
Domesticate you boys.
and he's
Should be a balmy day in Samara.
so then an elevator, and kind of he's standing with all the I guess the Union Ally crime lords, let's just say, and they're wanting to know where Kingpin is at.
Oh, please tell me.
And
He's right behind you.
And Wesley says, unfortunately, my employer is attending into other matters. He apologized to you, particularly Madame Gao. And she kind of, Madame Gao sort of, responds pretty much like nods her head. And then the two Russians are kind of tells Wesley that we do not deal with lapdogs. So they kind of feel like, why doesn't Kingpin show up and face us himself?
Not deal with lapdogs.
And
Tell Mr.
We don't.
but yet, but Wesley keeps Kingpin's name sort of, taboo, if you will. So then,
I would like to know why you're short.
So then he kind of asks the Russians why they're short at the cargo total, and the Russians say we were pretty much attacked by Daredevil, which, I'm guessing these Russians work for Kingpin, but Turk works for or at least has a partnership. Who was the guy with the gun who was transforming the women at the beginning of the episode. Then
on the cargo totals.
There was a problem.
At least with this first episode, is that the Man in Black, aka Daredevil, is pretty much sort of a phantom or a mystery at this point. And and so the Russians kind of feel like we don't, our men don't lie, and then
Men will not lie.
I said I'm on board.
and then what's his, hold on, Owl, and he pretty much, tries to continue the conversation, but Wesley is more important about the Man in Black, and she and Mrs. Ying is kind of interested.
She wants to know if this man stole the shipment for
Mrs. Kwan wants to know if she stole the shipment, if he stole the shipment herself, and they say that
He took out your man.
and Wesley's a little bit pissed that he took out his men, and how
Caught them by surprise.
and how they were caught by surprise and beaten with their bare hands. And Wesley can't believe that 4 men were defeated by 1 man with his bare hands, and the Russians were like saying that's what we were told. So then,
What we were told. Perhaps you should have been
pleased that he kind of thinks that Kingpin, who is his employer, is kind of feels like they're going to be inconvenienced by a lone vigilante. That we should, we should be worried. We should be worried about them because we don't want another Union Allied situation to happen. And then, but Wesley's kind of like, we're handling it.
We're in the process of negotiating.
And they're in the process of, and then basically he talks about how they're in the process of negotiating with Mr. Nixid, and the Russians are kind of pissed because why are they negotiating when think that they should, like, break bed and, or basically fight fire with fire and fight them. And uh, Gunkirk is basically saying,
Or handling
basically saying that we should really be, and Gunkirk's basically saying we should handle this, and Wesley's kind of letting them know that we are handling it ourselves. Meanwhile, of Matt's apartment and goes to an alleyway, Matt wakes up and follows her, and she's on her way to check it out again. And while she's there, she ends up getting attacked by a man. And the man basically, she goes back to not her apartment. Well, her apartment is the crime scene. She sees the blood on the floor. She ends up looking for. Apparently, she left a gun, or not a gun, a drive in the vent. And when she grabs it, two men show up and starts to attack her. And then while she's getting attacked, Daredevil said, and knocks her out. She's basically helpless on the floor, kind of panting, and the Russian attacker comes out with a knife, and Daredevil shows up, and basically they have a tussle and fight it off. They even break a table, and Daredevil just starts punching him and fighting him, and then it leads to him throwing the man out, or hold on, he fights them, that ends up pushing them into a window with Daredevil and the man. The man drops his gun. They fall into the water. Daredevil's bloody, and it's a pretty cool scene, or a pretty cool shot where he gets up, and we finally hear we go back to sort of his father, or he hears kind of the voice of his father, or his kind of a flashback to his father, to like him staying up late with his father, or with his father coming home. And basically they kind of have the same scene that they did in the Daredevil movie, where Jack Murdock pretty much says, I don't want you to be a fighter. I want you to be a lawyer, be a doctor, be a, do something, don't be like me, do something with your life, sort of thing. And then same thing we get in Daredevil the movie, where Jack pretty much tells him that I've never studied, and he doesn't want to be like, he wants his son to be more of a lawyer, and a lawyer. And then he says, I've never studied, and look where it got me. And you can tell that he just got back from a fight, and his son pretty much, kind of, they have this really good moment where his son, feels his face for the first time, and basically he kind of feels his face for the first time, and and the blood starts raining on, or dripping off Jack's face. And then Matt gets sort of inspiration from Jack to say, "Come on, Matty, get to work, get back up there." And he gets up there, and I like how you can see that you can see the red blood coming from his chin, and then the man that attacked Daredevil is walking down the steps to attack him to kind of finish the job, and it's in kind of slow motion, and then as he keeps coming closer, then they speed it up, and then he and Daredevil have a fight, and the fight is pretty epic. That there's a lot of like, I've noticed that this show it has more like the choreography is a lot more edgier, if you will, and he starts to like choke him, and then they fight in the rain, and then the assassin puts his hand out about to stab, or kind of get close to where he can stab Matt, and Matt kind of bends over and punches him right in the gut. And then he swings it, and then they fight, and it's kind of starts to speed back up. He breaks his arm, and Matt breaks the assailant's arm, and then the assailant tries to get up and crawls back up to kind of finish the fight. And then sound of a ting 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 ting, and he basically takes the knife, or takes the chain and wraps the chain, or attacks the assailant and wraps the chain around the assailant's throat. After knocking him out with his head, after knocking him out with a headbutt, he wraps it around his throat and punches him in the stomach, punches him about a couple times in the stomach and in the face, and does a final kick, like a side kick to it, and is knocked out in the rain, but he ends up getting back up. And then we see Karen come out and see kind of what basically just happened. And basically kind of sees the fight, and Daredevil finds the piece of paper, not the piece of paper, finds the thumb drive, and Karen's like, you can't tell anybody about what we've done, what's going on, and he says, well, we'll just tell everybody. So they throw the guy that tried to kill Karen onto the steps of the newspaper. I think it's the newspaper, the New York Bulletin, and then they print the story on the Union Allied pension plan, and then we start back to a limo where Wesley is talking to Kingpin about, should we be worried about the lawyers, and should we be worried about Karen Page, and
evidence will put Rance at the murder scene.
One of the guys talked to the authorities named McClintock, and that's what Kingpin wants, and Wesley suggests that they use pills that he uses to overdose and kind of use the story that he overdosed in less than an hour.
The remaining concern,
and he's more concerned about he's more concerned about the professional assassin that they had tried to kill Karen, and how was he subdued. And we know that Wesley is going to look into it, and then they're also kind of concerned about Karen as well.
Did I make the appropriate
and how they should,
Everything she knows is already in the papers.
How basically they shouldn't really worry about Karen because Karen has everything that she knows is already in the papers. And then
Her lawyers.
And then
Nelson and Murdoch.
That Kingpin is more concerned with her lawyers, Daredevil, aka Murdoch and Nelson and Murdoch.
Ambulance chasers.
But he's concerned about them. But Wesley is pretty much like saying they're ambulance chasers, they're clean. You don't really have to worry about them that much.
Start a file that may be of use.
Understood.
And that there's then basically we get to where Karen is, or he says start a file, or Kingpin wants to kind of put tabs on Nelson and Murdoch, and Karen is kind of now kind of a secretary to Matt and Foggy. Is now part of their law firm, and they're about to eat dinner or eat like lunch or so, or eat a meal, and then Karen basically says, Foggy's like, you should be thanking the nut in the mask, and Karen's like, he's not a nut, and we kind of get that kind of glimpse of, Matt seems a little bit kind of has very much like a, we're just glad you're okay, and that they kind of sit down and kind of have a meal, and then we get to figure out what, they kind of start to talk and have dinner or lunch or whatever, to have the meal, and Karen kind of says, I owe you one. Why don't you hire me as a secretary? And they say they're fine with that. And then, but we get kind of a, we have a where it's Matt goes to the gym to basically hit the bag a little bit, and we get a montage of basically what's happening with the crime lord syndicate. He tells and as he's punching and doing his getting fit for the fighting, we see a lot of the what the crime lords are doing, like each one of them are doing, such as we see that as he's fighting, we see that they're kind of deleting all the allied Bob Uncker's characters, deleting all the pension funds from where Karen used to work. Then we see one of the guards ended up one of the guards that Wesley talked to at the beginning of the scene of the or not in the beginning but at the park, they ended up staging his murder / suicide. Then they actually one of the other inmates from the prison hanged himself, or allegedly hanged himself, and then we see Madam Wynn basically do her heroin or marijuana marijuana, cocaine, marijuana, her drug trafficking, where they've used pretty much acid to blind all the people in the assembly line to cut, drugs and stuff. And then, I guess, is planning to take over Hell's Kitchen. And then we kind of see Turek basically start, getting ammunition for kind of his getting back his gun. And then and then he's still punching, and then we see basically they're still trafficking people like they were at the beginning of the show. They're actually now trafficking little boys, because we see this guy get, they stop his car, a van pulls up and kind of stops them, stops in front of them. Two men get out, they beat the father, and they kidnap the little boy, and then but they're too strong. Excuse me. And Devil back in black with his mask on, as he hears the city calling. And as he's hearing the city calling, he hears the conversations of everyone, and he hears the little boy scream, "Daddy," and "Daddy help, Daddy help," and then he ends up putting over his mask and jumping to the rescue. End of episode. So that was the episode of Daredevil. Sorry for the length. I'm trying to do this by myself, and I'm trying to structure it, but thank you for listening. Here are my final thoughts. I liked it. It had a lot of exposition, kind of like what we talked about with our next video, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, episode 2. But I feel like this one, it had a strong opening, like it had to kind of, I really like Charlie Cox as Daredevil. I like the fact that Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin is always mentioned as the employer, and I like Karen's kind of character as she's sort of trying to go. It's a good episode. I think that it was a, I thought it's a good episode. It makes me pumped for the next episode. It's I feel like this Daredevil is a lot grittier. I think it sort of takes, and it's bold to be a Marvel series. It is that kind of like, which it does kind of remind me of, if this was a movie, it would be probably rated R. But like, I like him. I like Charlie Cox as Daredevil. He's got some humor. I like, when you look at Ben Affleck in Daredevil, it's still a comic book movie, and that he was, and you can kind of tell that he's got the charm and the charisma, but because it's so comic booky and doesn't take it, I wouldn't say seriously, but take it well, that this show, I'm really kind of excited to see what's going to happen in episode 2. But for a pilot, it kicks it out of the park. I give the pilot a A+ or an 8.9. I'm really eager to see what happens, and I think Netflix took a really good risk in making this a good show. And so I will give this. So signing off. So I guess what I'm saying is, signing off. I'm Steve. What I'm saying is I'm really excited to see what's going to happen, and I'm wanting to see what more to come. Signing off, I'm Steve, and thank you. Like and subscribe. Hope you enjoy. Bye.